Translation for the Srila Prabhupada. According to Vedic opinion, there are two ways of passing from this world. One in light and one in darkness. One passes in light, he does not come back. But when passes in darkness, he returns. So anybody wants to read further? What we'll do, this is a small purpose, so let's complete the purpose, then we'll do 27 also and discuss together. Okay, purpose anybody wants to read? You can do the mic. Mic is there, other mic there. Anybody wants to read? Yeah. No, what? We control the... Yeah.
Prabhupada. The same description of departure and return is quoted by Acharya Baldev Vidyabhushan from Chandogya Upanishad. Those who are fruited laborers and philosophical speculators from time immemorial are constantly going and coming. Actually, they do not attain ultimate salvation, for they do not surrender to Krishna.
So we'll go to 27. Please repeat after me. Naite Sruti Partha Janana Yogi Muyati Kaschana Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Yoga Yukta Bhavarjuna. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Although the devotees know these two paths, O Arjuna, they are never bewildered. Therefore, be always fixed in devotion. Anybody wants to read? Prabhupada?
Either of those paths is troublesome. The best way to be absorbed in Krishna consciousness is to be always doubted in his service, and this will make one's path to the spiritual kingdom safe, certain and direct. The word Yoga Yukta is especially significant in this verse. One who is firm in his yoga is constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness in all his activities. See, Rupa Goswami advises Anasaktasya Vishayan Yatarham Upayunjataha. One should be unattached in material affairs and do everything in Krishna consciousness. By this system, which is called Yukta Vairagya, one attains perfection. Therefore, the devotee is not disturbed by these descriptions, because he knows that his passage to the Supreme Abode is guaranteed by devotional service.
Yes. So, if you see these two verses, like 26, verse 26 is telling there are two ways to passing from this world. One is in light and one is in darkness. Right? And then what happens if one passes in light and one passes in darkness? So what exactly one passes in light and one passes in darkness? Right? That exactly means is basically one passes getting knowledge or impurity. Right? Impurity, if they are passing, then they will basically not return back. And when in darkness, by being in ignorance or by doing all sins, we are actually passing in darkness. Right? So they will all come again and again and again in this world, right? In this material universe. Now the next verse is telling that devotees, now these next two verses are telling the special, very special things about devotional life or devotees. But what is special? The devotees know this But still, Krishna is saying, Arjuna, they are never bewildered, therefore be always fixed in devotion. Right? And in purport, Prabhupada is giving very, very important point. Right? What is that important point Prabhupada is giving? Anybody? Don't get distracted by what? Okay. Little further. Right? That is yes, correct. But how? Correct. And how it is? That is what Rupa Goswami has told, right? What is Rupa Goswami has said? Correct. So what is that word which was used for that? Yukta Vairagya. Right? Yukta Vairagya. So what is Vairagya? Let's go a little detail. What is Vairagya? Detachment. So detachment means what? Okay, one way. Who does that? Which kind of yogi does that? Karma yogi. Detached from your fruits of your karma. Right? Detachment from. So don't expect that. What else detachment means in this context? Relations, senses, yeah, that is one detachment, yes. So what is Yukta Vairagya? What is Yukta means? Involved, yes. So how it is possible? Or somebody else said something else? Yukta Vairagya, Yukta means what? Engaged? Okay. Yeah. So yeah? If a little on, there is a fan, you can sit in front of the fan, please. Yeah. So how you can be detached but still engaged? How can you be what you mentioned is involved, right? And still attached. So it is like Vairagya. Vairagya means you have a cup, right? Nothing should be there in that cup, right? Empty. Yes. Correct. Yes. Correct. That is correct. Yes. So how we will do that, as Prabhuji and Mataji explained. So first let's see if the cup is empty, that is Vairagya. Now it is saying Yukta. Yukta means filled. Right? So how it can be filled? Right? That is the best thing about Krishna consciousness. Right? Krishna consciousness is not empty. What happens that Krishna consciousness, or in other meditations, what happens, they said detach. But if you see our constitutional position is not everybody can detach so much. Right? So Krishna consciousness is saying Yukta Vairagya, that means filled that whole thing, that empty thing with Krishna. Very, very important point, and this is the point which Srila Prabhupada has brought forward. Right? In ISKCON. That is one of the things, that attracts so many devotees to Krishna consciousness. Because you don't have to change much, you don't have to leave anything. Yeah? You have to just fill everything with Krishna. But what happens mostly in our cases, that we struggle. Right? Why we struggle? Because we are concentrating more on detachment. Right? So if you just concentrate on detachment, then what happens that you become empty. There are chances that we will become empty. For some time it is okay to learn to do something. But afterwards what happens? Automatically we get frustrated. Why should I do this? Why should I do this? Why should I do this? Because what is happening, we were doing something always, suddenly we stopped doing that. Right? Now if we stop, we are not moving, what will happen? We will get frustrated. Right? We will not move forward. So it is equally important that we In fact, I would say see, one activity is detaching ourselves, stopping. Other activities, filling Krishna in. Right? These are the two activities. Right? What we should do, we should try to fill Krishna much faster than trying to detach. So that means you get engaged in all Krishna conscious activities. Bring Krishna somehow in your life, in our life. So right from beginning of the day, right from start of your morning to end of our night. Bring somehow you can see Krishna's photo, put Krishna's photo multiple places. Right? Hear about Krishna. There are so many things available out there which you can hear, which you can see. Yes? Your question? Okay. Sudhakar, okay. Now somebody, but first let's go. Everybody agrees to this? So how we can bring much faster Krishna? What is the easiest way to bring Krishna much faster in our life? Chanting is one way, but how you can bring much faster Krishna? Listening about. So basically associating more. So if you have association, that what happens, then automatically all things will be taken care. Right? So we need to feel for that, we need to think for that, we need to plan for that. Everybody agrees? Yeah. Yes, correct. Yes, very nice point. Yeah, very nice point. That is very important also. That's the reason we should be happy, and we should basically thankful to Prabhupada that there are more opportunities because of Prabhupada, because of Sangha here, because of ISKCON. We have a lot of opportunities to do that. So our Sangha, we do a lot of programs. So there are a lot of opportunities to do Seva. And Prabhuji rightly said that if you already signed up for Seva, you are thinking from 1 month, 1 week, 2 weeks, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. That is also an activity in Krishna consciousness. Okay. So now somebody can come. We can have that question. Okay, that's fine. We can bring Krishna, but how I will bring Krishna? Because I'm so busy. I'm not able to bring Krishna at all. Right? I'm so busy. I'm not able to do anything. Or I don't have. I am not able to do that much which I want to do. That problem we have, right? Everybody of us have. So how to solve that problem? Anybody, any ideas? Yes, Mataji? Very nice, very nice. So everybody agrees? So is it possible? It is easy? Let me see. It is possible. Is it easy? So what will help? Let's understand first, right? So we know the target. Right? Mataji put that target, which is right, which is the perfect target. Now we want to reach there. So how we will reach there? What are the things? So what I will do, first I will try to find what are the hurdles to reach that. Right? So try to find what are the hurdles, try to clear those hurdles, and then have a path, and consistently we wanted to see how I can reach. Some plan should be there, right? Yeah.
Sometimes you just get started and eventually things will happen.
Mm-hmm.
The same, right? Like the analytical view, look at the hurdles. The practical view is let's get started and things will work out.
Mm-hmm. But that is also a plan, isn't it? Because we are starting. Because what happens if somebody is waiting to things to start, it may start, it may not start. And basically we are in material world, so mostly it will not start. Right? Because the whole concept of material world is opposite to that, right? So the plan is, yes, one plan is start. Yes? The plan. So the basic, we will try, the basic thing to start means basically, yes, you will try to involve more and more Krishna, because you have faith that yes, it will work. The main important thing is we have faith. So we should have that little bit faith also, which will help us to move forward. So I mentioned about hurdles. So what could be the hurdles? The major hurdle I could see is we always struggle with our personalities. We have multiple personalities in us. Right? We have multiple layers on us. Right? I am a father, okay, I have few things to do, many things to do, right? I have husband, much more things to do, right? I am employee somewhere, right? So I have to do a lot of things for that also. Right? So then these are all our coverings, right? So what happens if we identify ourselves with those coverings, right? It's like our dress. So tomorrow if somebody is there who is wearing police or cop's dress, so he is going out, he is doing cop's duty. Comes home, and if he does his cop's duty with his wife or with his kids, will it work? It will not. Right? Same thing with if you see any condition. Right? Somebody is doing that outside, but is that the real personality? Right? So what is important? The important is we need to find out what is our real personality. So what will happen once we know this is what I am, everything else automatically becomes a layer. Currently what is happening, we are identifying ourselves with those layers. So we struggle because we are completely identifying with those layers. Oh, I am this worker, so I have to work, nothing else will come. Okay? But it will help us if we find our own true identity. Then automatically we understand this is covering, that means it has some limitations, right? Those coverings cannot be our true identity. Correct? Yeah? So how we will find ourselves? I think most of us already know what is our true identity. Yes? What is our true identity? Yeah, we are part and parcel of Krishna and eternal servant. Correct? Now we know this because of Prabhupada, because of his knowledge and his mercy. We know. Now we have to remind ourselves again and again and again. So how we will remind ourselves that? By serving, you said? Yes, one way is yes, serving. So what serving does? How? So it reinforces the identity. Maybe you want to take mic so that everybody can hear.
Reinforces the identity that we are actually serving. So
How?
because when we are engaged in the service, we are thinking that yes, we are servants, so that identity becomes stronger, and we hopefully realize over time that other entities are only temporary.
Also, we are cutting all our identities, right? Because we are serving, we can do something else that time, which can give us some other identity, right? So, for example, oh, I don't want to go to serve, I will just sit on the sofa and watch TV. But that watching TV is different identity, isn't it? That identity is telling you, you enjoy. But if you close that and you try to go and serve, right? That is telling you, yes, I am serving for Krishna. That is giving you impression in your heart, right? In our heart, that yes, now I am serving. So I am a servant. So it is taking us closer and closer to our real identity. Okay, what else we can do? Serving is good actually. You took that first because it's easy, and it's basically we just have to go and stand in front of our temple managers saying, okay, I am available, you put me somewhere. So it's easy, right? We have to just keep ourselves open and flexible. What else we can do? Yes, very, very important. Chanting. So how chanting establishes our true identity? Very nice, yeah. So one thing is Krishna's names are pure, so we are actually getting connected to Krishna, which is the true identity, what we have, part and parcel of Krishna. So we are connecting to the whole one. Yes. There is another thing also which does chanting. Actually, what happens? Our mind wants to run here and there, but chanting will pull it back while we are trying to chant. Right? It will pull it back, or we should pull it back while chanting. Right? So what is that? That mind going here and there is what? Mind is reminding us, oh, you have a different identity. Oh, you have to do this. So what is that? That is our different identity. Oh, we have to do that. Oh, I have to do this. Oh, it will be best if I do something else. So those are different identities. What we are trying to do, we are trying to pull it again back and saying, no, this is your identity. Correct? So that will also remind us for our real identity. Okay? Anything else before we go to the next verse?
Think of our other identities in terms of our original identity.
Very nice, very good point. Yes, you wanted to say something?
Yes, Prabhuji. What I wanted to say is that let's say that someone is there and he is not finding any time out of busy schedule to perform any service or get involved in any way. What he can also do is, which I find a lot of times very effective, is that you can contribute through by donating some Lakshmi, and that way then even your office works becomes the Krishna consciousness work. Actually, this was I asked this to our temple president, and he said this way.
Correct, very nice. So that also is a yukta vairagya. So vairagya, there is a detachment from Lakshmi, because we are giving, right? Usually that attachment is there, we don't want to give, right? So we are giving, but we are bringing Krishna by giving that for Krishna's service. Right? So that is the way yukta vairagya. We can give for multiple things, but you are bringing Krishna, which will give you the ultimate benefit. Right? Also, I want to go back to Suhas Prabhu's point. Even when you are thinking about other identities, right? When our mind is thinking, if we train our mind to think, even those identities are connected with Krishna, right? Or connected with our two identity. Right? Like for example, Mataji said that you have identity as a mother because you have a son and you have a daughter, right? But you are connecting that identity with your true identity by bringing Krishna, by saying, oh, Krishna has sent me these kids, right? So that is what we can do. Even that identity you tried to create the situation of Yukta Vairagya. Okay. Any question or comment? Okay, so we'll go to the next verse. So please repeat after me. Vedeshu yajneshu tapasasu chaiva. Vedeshu yajneshu tapasasu chaiva. दानेषु यत पुण्यफलं प्रदिष्टम् अत्येति तत् सर्वम् इदं विदित्वा योगी परं स्थानम् उपैति चाद्यम्. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. A person who accepts the path of devotional service is not bereft of the results derived from studying the Vedas, performing austere sacrifices, giving charity, or pursuing philosophical and futile activities. Simply by performing devotional service, he attains all these, and at the end he reaches the supreme eternal abode. So perfect. Maybe we can just start reading maybe one paragraph at a time. Please.
This verse is the summation of the 7th and 8th chapters, which particularly deal with Krishna consciousness and devotional service. One has to study the Vedas under the guidance of the spiritual master and undergo many austerities and penances while living under his care. A brahmachari has to live in the home of the spiritual master just like a servant, and he must beg alms from door to door and bring them to the spiritual master. He takes food only under the master's order, and if the master neglects to call the student for food that day, the student fasts. These are some of the Vedic principles for observing brahmacharya.
So, Prabhupada is saying this is basically last verse of chapter 8, and then Prabhupada is saying this is summation of 7th and 8th chapter. And then Prabhupada is basically further describing the whole life of a devotee, how devotee can live a life. That is a Prabhupada. So let's read further. Anybody? Next paragraph, please.
After the student studies the Vedas under the master for some time, at least from age 5 to 20, he becomes a man of perfect character. Study of the Vedas is not meant for the recreation of armchair speculators, but for the formation of character. After this training, the brahmachari is allowed to enter into household life and marry. When he is a householder, he has to perform many sacrifices so that he may achieve further enlightenment. He must also give charity according to the country, time, and candidate, discriminating among charity in goodness, in passion, and in ignorance, as described in Bhagavad Gita. Then, after retiring from household life, upon accepting the order of Vanaprastha, he undergoes severe penances, living in forests, dressing with tree bark, not sharing, etc. By carrying out the orders of brahmacharya, household life, Vanaprastha, and finally sannyasa, one becomes elevated to the perfectional stage of life. Some are then elevated to heavenly kingdoms, and when they become even more advanced, they are liberated in the spiritual sky, either in the impersonal Brahma-jyotir, or in Vaikuntha planets, or Krishnaloka. This is the path outlined by Vedic literatures.
So Prabhupada has mentioned what is outlined in Vedic literature. So Brahmacharya is basically they go to Gurukul and serve to their Guru and go and beg alms. Bring those alms, they don't eat those to Guru, and if Guru actually asks them to eat, then only they eat. If Guru forgets, that is a pravachan, then they will not eat. Then from that they will basically go to the Grihastha ashram where they can marry, they can have family. But in addition to that, there are many sacrifices mentioned to them. Also they have to give charity. Then from that they are going to go to Vanaprastha, right? And then sannyasa, that is what mentioned. So all these needs to be done to build the character which will basically connect to Krishna, the character which will bring the true identity forth, right? And so that then they can directly go to Krishna, that is what heavenly kingdom, and then if they become more advanced, they will go back to Krishna. Okay. So can we do all this? Now it's not practical to do all these, right? So does that mean we don't have any chance? No. Prabhupada is saying in the next verse, the beauty of Krishna consciousness, however, is that by one stroke, by engaging in devotional service, one can surpass all the rituals of the different orders of life. So once we do devotional service, that's it. Rest all, even if you don't do, that is okay. It will take care of this. How is? Correct. Very, very, very nice question. So how just devotional service is replacing these whole things? So what are these whole things doing? Building character as what? Okay, yeah, maybe
We can connect with Krishna.
correct. So it is bringing our true identity up front, forth.
Right.
What devotional service does?
It does that.
It's the same thing, right? So that's the reason, in one stroke, it will take care of it.
So I had a question, Prabhupada.
Should I ask now or should I wait?
Related?
Related to this,
Yeah,
yeah.
please.
So, I mean, suppose we are doing charity work by cooking for a lot of hungry people, let's say. And on the other hand, we are cooking for devotees in a temple. So, in the first case, these people are hungry, so that is charity work. There is no explicit spiritual element to it. In the second case, we are in a temple and we are doing seva in a temple. So in the first case, we get pious credits, we get some positive karma points, piety. In the second case, it's not really piety that we are getting just we're reinforcing our identity by doing seva. Right? But
So it doesn't automatically happen. So even doing that seva, if you are doing for Krishna, then we will get connected to Krishna, the true identity. But even if you are thinking for some benefits, and we are doing, we will still get piety.
right, I see. Okay, but what I'm confused about is in the first case, those people are really needy, they're hungry. So you're serving them by cooking. But in the second case, the people are not that needy, they're not hungry. So in the first case, it seems like you're doing greater good.
Correct. You are doing good. Yes, greater things you are doing.
You're doing greater things, but in the second case, you're achieving something more than what you're achieving in the first case. There's I'm missing something here, I think.
Yeah. So Mataji has an answer, or you wanted to add?
You could connect people hungry with Krishna, offering prasad to them, cooking, offering prasad. So
Right.
that would be like a
Yes.
connect everything.
Connected. Yeah, the Prabhu's question is actually that how in first case we are doing more but we are not getting much. In the second case we may not be doing more but we are getting much. Because there is a difference right? The difference is we are serving the body in the first case. In the second case, you are serving the whole.
But are we also serving Krishna in the first case a little bit because we're serving
Yeah, through that activity, right?
even though we're serving the bodies of these hungry people,
Yes.
we're still serving Krishna because we're in a small way taking care of his children.
If you're thinking Krishna and serving, then it is better you bring Krishna in and then serve them. Then you will get complete benefit. It will not automatically happen.
Bring Krishna into our hearts or tell people about Krishna.
Our heart, also in our action, that you can offer that as a prasad, and then give as a prasad, offer as a bhoga and give as a prasadam to everybody. Right? So Prabhupada has mentioned, 1 minute, I'll just complete this. Prabhupada has mentioned the similar whatever you have, right? That somebody asked a similar question to Prabhupada, right? They are needy, so helping them is better or helping, doing this is better. Prabhupada said that if somebody is, sinking in water, right, is not able to swim, so other person jumps and just saves that person's clothes. Is that good? No, we have to save the person. The Krishna conscious activity will save the person, not his clothes. So it will be benefited to that person if we bring Krishna and give Krishna Prasad to that person. So we are doing highest thing in fact. Yes, ma'am?
There's a problem with just donating food, the buddhi does not change.
Okay.
Just eating food.
Uh-huh.
Help the person change his character. That's
Yeah.
what's happening in just he may go back to his regular.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was not my question.
Yeah, his question was different. Correct.
Yeah.
I think he understands that. His question was why that is, imbalance. In,
But that is how you are trying to explain it,
yeah.
right? But if I look at that from an objective perspective, right, to help someone who is needy is more like a punya than helping someone or serving the food someone who is just a devotee. Now we are putting the thought that we are serving God through him, right? But if you look at objectively, maybe there is more value in serving the person who is hungry.
Yeah, so that is what I'm saying. That serve as Krishna Prasad. Right? So what happens that not only you are serving that person, but you are connecting that person to find his true identity. See, punya, we will get more if we just do the needy part. But what happens with punya?
You have to come back to.
So your bank balance will increase. So what happens with our bank balance? Our balance in this, that yes, we will get a good life, right? But what is the guarantee that good life will take us towards Krishna? Right? So that is and what Prabhuji said, that if we have that balance, we have to come this world to empty that balance. With that balance, we cannot go to
So
Krishna
you're
Loka.
saying that if we do this charity work, but we think of it as directly serving Krishna and we offer that food as bhoga,
Yeah.
then that is not piety.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, because you are bringing Krishna in that, right? And what happens? Thinking is, yes, the consciousness is important, but you have to be smart also, right? Where it is going. Like for example, somebody say, yeah, I am thinking, and let me give this money to this charity. But if they are not using in proper way, then those partial karma also we will get. Yes.
They say
You have to use both punya and papa. It should be zero
Balance.
to go back to Krishna or Vaikuntha. So, what does it mean to say like I should have zero punya? Does it mean that I should not do any punya activities like charity or
Right.
like how can you be without doing?
Correct. So what happens that if you do things by bringing Krishna in, right, you are detached you are doing for Yukta Vairagya. If you are detached, then that part doesn't come, Punya and Papa. See how Arjuna, this whole thing, right? How Arjuna killed. He killed his grandfather, he killed his guru, but he didn't got a sin. Why he didn't got the sin? Because same thing, Krishna's order, for not my satisfaction, for Krishna's satisfaction only. And Krishna is perfect, right? He is a Lord himself, God himself. So those things doesn't come picture then. Yes.
Okay, in that case,
Up. Yeah.
But in that case, how do you interpret what is the not for good cause? Because you can interpret anything. The people. So when I look at many business people, right? They do all these good things. They do puja and archa. Maybe they are even ISKCON, right? But when they go out in the real world, they'll continue doing what they do. That's my assumption. And they might be convincing them that they are doing it right because that is needed for their work. Same thing may apply to us, the way we act in the real world.
Yeah, I didn't understand the point.
So,
Sorry.
as you mentioned, right, okay, so Sri Krishna told Arjuna to kill all his uncles and grandfathers, right? So we may convince ourselves in this real world to do things because they are needed or required to live this life. And we may convince ourselves that this is for Krishna's sake. But we need some guideline to figure out is that really the truth.
Correct. I got it. Yeah. Very, very nice question. Yeah. Very, very valid question. That's the reason we have Guru. Right? So Shastra says that Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, all these triangle, if they are pointing to the same conclusion, then that is correct. If all they are saying it is correct, then it is correct. Right? So how we can approach those? Through Guru. Right? So if we are doubtful, then yes, we need to discuss that, whether it is correct or not correct. Yes. Because it's very important to do correctly. Just whimsically, oh, this is correct, let me do this, will not help us. It may actually harm us more. Yeah? Is that okay? Yeah. Yes, Prabhu?
To add to that, Prabhu, the barometer is to check for yourself if you're chanting or serving the Lord better. And if the action or the judgment that a person is making, if that's going to help them to serve the Lord better, or in this case, I think in this yuga, it's chanting Muhammad. If that's getting better, I think that's what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes we might not see that it might get
Directly, yeah.
Yeah, but in that case, as you just mentioned, like Guru or a person of higher conscious, devotee, that their suggestion will help.
Yeah, so yeah, important point what you have mentioned. So simple way to check, thumb rule, that is what Prabhu is saying. Right? The thumb rule is check whether that activity, that thing what we are doing is taking us closer to Krishna or away from Krishna. Okay? So yes, if we can clearly see that, then we know what is right, what is wrong. But no, there is a jumble because many times those confusions are there. Then yes, then go to Guru, then go to devotees, senior devotees. They can guide you, they can help us.
But if that is the way you have lived until now, or if you cannot differentiate between right and wrong, because you don't have that understanding, then you may not be able to distinguish between those two things. You convince yourself, and there is no need of even convincing yourself, because whatever you see is right, because you don't know what is wrong.
Correct, yeah. That's the reason we should have association. In association they will make sure, devotees will make sure they will hold our ear and say, do this way. Ask Sudhakar Prabhu, then he will tell us. Yeah. So that will happen that way. sadhu and shastra. Yes, the thing if that thing is correct, everything will be aligned. Sadhu will be telling the same thing, Guru will be telling the same thing, Shastra, scriptures will say the same thing. Then there is a problem. Then there is a problem.
So if Guru tells something, my Guru is my Guru, so I have to go. I have to obey that, right?
Yes, our duty is to obey.
So if that is different from Shastra and
Then we humbly ask Guru that this is what I am seeing it. Right? Then please they will be able to explain. Yes.
So on the same point, Prabhu, we are not really qualified to understand Shastra on our own. Like, we are able to read Bhagavad Gita now because Srila Prabhupada has basically written these purports for us, right? So if, in the same example what Prabhuji just asked, right, if the Guru is saying something which is not matching Shastra, actually we are interpreting Shastra only through the eyes of the Guru. So my question is that Guru and Shastra, they should be like independent data points, right? But they really are not, because we're actually seeing Shastra only through the Guru. So the Guru is wrong in some case. We may not realize it, right? And also, what exactly is sadhu, Prabhu? Like I don't know.
Sadhu means, as we simply know, saint or saintly persons.
But not Guru.
Not Guru. That's the reason that point is there.
Okay, so he could be Guru of somebody else.
Correct. He can be Guru of somebody else, but that's the reason.
Yeah.
If you see that there is some external point which will help to balance that again.
Okay. Yeah, I'm asking this question because one of my friends had this problem, and in that case, if you analyze it in the situation of Guru, Sadhu and Shastra, there is no way to detect that.
There is, right? If sadhu is bought in that situation, because I know that situation, so sadhu is bought in that situation, then yes.
But from Shastra you would not detect it. Guru and Shastra would.
There is a possibility. There is a possibility, but here in that case, that particular person was just acting like Guru. Right? So there also, if you see difference, then also, because the person has to be first at least true person. Then the next thing comes. Right? So in that case, that true person was not there.
It's purport on the probably it was Bhagavatam or Srimad Bhagavad Gita, where he has mentioned that if Guru actually is not behaving in right way as per Shastra and as per guidelines, then he should be given up.
Rejected.
Yes.
Correct. So that is what I was mentioning to it. Yes.
One more thing I wanted to mention, Prabhuji. Few weeks back, Prabhuji was visiting here, and I think you mentioned him as your Shiksha Guru.
Yeah. Same down Prabhu. Yes.
So he mentioned one point, and that I find relating to your questions, that what he said, that you cannot be, when you are part of association in ISKCON, you cannot switch on your Krishna consciousness, and when you are outside world, you cannot switch it off that, okay, now I'm no more Krishna conscious. So he said that, you should try to fit other things in your life. You should guide your line as per Krishna consciousness and try to fit other things instead of trying to fit Krishna in your life. So if you follow that guideline, then your dilemmas will not come in picture. You'll know and then what Prabhuji is saying, that those 3 points will guide you in right direction.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Yes. Any other? Sure. So we'll continue. Last 2 paragraphs are there. So let me read. The words idam viditva indicate that one should understand the instructions given by Sri Krishna in this chapter and the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. One should try to understand these chapters not by scholarship or mental speculation, but by hearing them in association with devotees. Chapters 7 through 12 are the essence of Bhagavad Gita. The first 6 and the last 6 chapters are like coverings for the middle 6 chapters, which are especially protected by the Lord. If one is fortunate enough to understand Bhagavad Gita, especially these middle 6 chapters, in the association of devotees, then his life at once becomes glorified beyond all penances, sacrifices, charities, speculations, etc. For one can achieve all the results of these activities simply by Krishna consciousness. Right? So this 6th chapter, what we are doing now, is very, very important. Right? It's basically sense, the middle 6th chapter. Like in one of the lecture I was hearing, they compared as a sandwich. Right? So if you talk about sandwich, you don't say that as a bread sandwich. You say something, whatever is in between. Right? So if cheese sandwich, because cheese is in between, vegetable is in between. Because that whole sandwich got the recognition, whatever is middle part. So like that, the middle part is very important in this. Now, this is, the next paragraph is very important. Let's hear it, with concentration. One who has a little faith in Bhagavad Gita should learn Bhagavad Gita from a devotee, because in the beginning of the 4th chapter it is stated clearly that Bhagavad Gita can be understood only by devotees. No one else can perfectly understand the purpose of Bhagavad Gita. One should therefore learn Bhagavad Gita from a devotee of Krishna, not from mental speculators. This is a sign of faith. When one searches for a devotee and finally gets the devotee's association, one actually begins to study and understand Bhagavad Gita. By advancement in the association of the devotee, one is placed in devotional service, and this service dispels all one's misgivings by Krishna conscious about Krishna or God and Krishna's activities, form, pastimes, name and other features. After these misgivings have been perfectly cleared away, one becomes fixed in one's study. Then one relishes the study of Bhagavad Gita and attains the state of feeling always Krishna consciousness. The Krishna conscious. In the advanced stage, one falls completely in love with Krishna. This highest perfectional stage of life enables the devotee to be transferred to Krishna's abode in the spiritual sky, Golok Vrindavan, where the devotee becomes eternally happy. Thus end the Bhakti Vedanta purpose to the 8th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of attaining the Supreme. Right? So Prabhupada has mentioned, it's very important. So Prabhupada is saying that association of devotee is important. So what happens with association of devotee? That we start doing devotional service. What devotional service does? Devotional service cleans up, right, all the misgivings about Krishna, about God, about Krishna's activities, form, pastimes, name and other features. Once that is cleaned up, then what happens? Then we will be able to understand Bhagavad Gita better. Right? It is logical, right? If Bhagavad Gita is spoken by Krishna, if we have misgivings about the person who has spoken, we will not be able to understand clearly that. Right? So, so philanthropic work is not included if it is just done for body. So for Krishna conscious activities, if it is done and it is used for Krishna's activities, then yes, it is done. It is included.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you see that on the road there is some poor persons.
Yeah, just one minute. I'll just make one more point. So Srila Rupa Goswami actually has given these all activities in Okay, not nectar of devotion, but the nectar of instruction. Yeah, nectar of instructions. It is given that what are the things we can do. Activities. Yeah. Go ahead. We were saying something more.
Yes, if you see on the road, if you see one poor
If
person.
you can, sorry, Prabhu. If you can just on the mic. Yeah.
On the road, if you see one poor person is very hungry, he's very hungry. So what to do for that? Someone told that he is suffering because of his karma.
Correct.
But if you see and go away from him, that is not the good thing, right?
Correct.
So what to do for that?
Correct. So what do you, I would ask you the question. What would you do?
I have to give some food to him.
Correct. So what you will give?
Food.
Yeah. So if you give Krishna Prasadam to him, then you will benefit him 100%. Somebody will say, no, I will give money. What is the guarantee you will not go and get something in that money? So that karma we will get if you do that. Yeah? He goes and brings something with that money.
Oh.
He goes and eat meat with that money. Understand? So we have to be smart. We have to be very, very careful when we are doing charity. Yeah?
So the contributor also takes a part.
Of course. Yeah, because if the contributor doesn't give, he wouldn't have done that, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Yes, we shouldn't. This is my personal opinion. Right? Yes, because we are not sure, right? And I experienced this. Yeah. So we should spend some time to see that, because there are both ways, right? We can take chances, but it's up to us whether we want to take chances. Intelligently. That is what I meant. Right. But then if you don't have, then you give something which is you are sure that he will not misuse it. Right? There are ways to do it. Little bit we need to use our intelligence, imagination more on that.
To the Krishna around you and then give it to him. It's a consciousness that matters.
Yeah, that is also fine. That is also can be done. Because I'll tell my own
I mean, here I think main thing is consciousness with which we want to help people.
Yeah.
It's not to bring out a change which is temporary. It's cure the cancer rather than just do a chemo for the time being or something.
Yeah. And then let's not get let me clarify, right? That first Vaishnava, right, devotee of Lord, devotee of Vaishnavas, the foremost character of Vaishnava is compassion, right? So it is not that yes we wanted to outright reject and say no, I don't want to, somebody is dying there, I don't want to help. First we need to help so that that person will survive, right? And then we should give that person Krishna consciousness. But our conditions, most of us, our conditions are not like that we will have some situation like that. So the situation mostly comes like, somebody is coming and asking you the money. Right? And I'll tell my personal experience also. Usually on this traffic lights and other things nowadays, or in summer, the people come and they want to get money for many purposes, different purposes. So when same thing happened in one of the these traffic light while I'm going to office, that they have the emergency like this fire brigade and fire engine place, and they do this every year charity. So they were collecting the charity, right? So I gave $1. I said, yeah, this is a good cause because they are helping. I gave $1. So while coming in the evening, I saw that a lot of smell is coming from that area. Right? So they all were giving, because all the people who work hard, right, the whole day they were collecting money. So at the end they were giving party to those guys. So yeah, you all worked, so the party was given, and remaining money they will use for things. But the problem is what they were doing in that party. So our money is used for that purpose. So we have to be smart. I'm not saying don't use. Maybe we can do something very useful for them for that activity instead of money. Like, I don't know, whatever they need. So for example, there are so many people there, whole night they are staying there. Maybe we can go give them some breakfast packets we can give. So we're sure that yes, this is what will be used. So we have to be a little smart in that case. Hope I'm clear. So compassion is very important. We have to be compassionate. To Sivanand Prabhu said this, and I think he said multiple times, right, that when he was coming first initially, when he was going to temple, that somebody asked him, somebody asked to their, the main person in the temple that because he was insisting, the other person was insisting, the senior devotee was insisting everybody that you have to come, for Mangalarti, you have to come on time so that you can take darshan and all that. So the other person, another new devotee was asking, okay, Prabhu, if I'm coming on the cycle because, and if somebody got hurt in the road and he needs help, should I leave him or should I come to, should I help him or leave him and come to Mangalarti? What should I do? But these type of questions are not sensible questions, right? Our first duty is to help that person. We know the difference between person and Mangalarti, right? Person's life and Mangalarti. So we have to use our intelligence. Okay? Any other questions? Sorry, it took a little more time, so we'll do one round. So before we do round, I just wanted to do some announcements. So one thing, very important announcement and request, that next Saturday we will be doing 24 hours kirtan here, starting 10 o'clock in the morning, which will go to 10 o'clock in Sunday. So Saturday 10 o'clock to Sunday. Most of the singers will be kids. That is what we are trying to desire. But 24 hours will not be possible for kids, so adults will be also there. But we request you, your kids, or if you have somebody who you can bring for sing, so please bring them. Gita Kirti Mataji is collecting the names and doing the schedule, so please meet her. And we need all of you to spend as much time you can spend that day here. I humbly request all to come and spend time with us. Okay. So next Friday we will not have Bhakti Viksha, because Saturday we will have full. So the whole thing, I would request everybody to come on Saturday rather than Friday. Bhakti Viksha. Okay, please come. Hare Krishna. And Prabhu, you want to give some, information announcements? So Krishu, while we are doing that, can you pass on Japa Mala to everybody? Here your Japa Mala is here.
Hare Krishna devotees, we have two announcements. One, tomorrow we have a home program at Hari Prabhu and Soumya Mataji's home, and the program starts at 3 o'clock and ends at 8 o'clock. The program follows Kirtan and Krishna Katha. The program will be by her grace Dhanalakshmi Devi Dasi Mataji. She is from ISKCON Phoenix.
Can I have it? Yeah, Krishu.
So please attend the program. So the email will forward the email to you once again this evening. So one more program we have
retreat on 18th of October. The retreat by His Holiness Janananda Goswami Maharaj. The topic of the retreat is how will we ever chant with taste, with a little help from our friends. The retreat will start on 18th of October, that is on Friday evening around 6 o'clock. But the main program starts on Saturday, that is the 19th. The program is at West Temple in Pennsylvania. So please try to attend and take the association of Maharaj, and the topic is very nice topic, and we'll all get benefited with this topic. So if at all you would like to attend, please let me know. I can note down the names, and accordingly I'll communicate to Murli Manohar Prabhu, who is host of the program. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Babu. So just wanted to add on the retreat. So retreat is a very, very good opportunity to forget everything and just immerse ourselves in Krishna Katha and be with devotees. And Maharaj, His Holiness Janananda Goswami Maharaj, amazing personality. He in fact comes every year to our Bhakti Vriksha. This year also we'll see, but his timings may not be matching with us. So, but he comes here. Yeah, we are very fortunate. Last few years, we were having him here. Amazing personality, very practical, very nice. We can ask questions and he will give a perfect solution to our doubts, our questions. So if we get a chance, I think we should try to attend the retreat. Even the place is also very nice, Braj, not far from here, maybe 2 hours 15 minutes or so. 20 hours Kirtan in Gitanagari. Yes. Sorry. You are right. Okay, so we'll do one round of chanting. So everybody will, let's together try to hear the sound vibration, try to hear Krishna's names. So we'll take blessings of Panchatattva first, and then we'll do 3 times. We'll do Panchatattva mantra and do Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shrivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda.